Thoughts? Questions?
I'm interested in that community of 30,000 people in New York.
Yes.
Was it around a certain issue that everybody got together and started talking, or what was it that...
That's really what this, a large part of the second part of the talk will be about, and I'll show slides. And it was, but to answer you briefly now, it was actually not a single issue movement. They took a very ecological approach in that they looked at, in a holistic way, at their community and saw how the different pieces could work together. And that was very important.
Okay.
And who, to continue this, who started this? Because if you are thinking of society as a web, somebody has to take the step to initiate something. So how
It was, there was a leadership that grew from out of the community, and very interesting actually, a lot of the groups that or a couple of the groups that I worked with, the leadership emerged from the street gangs. They were sort of natural leaders who had been into all kinds of antisocial stuff, and a couple of them got sent off to prison, and they studied and they changed their minds, and they came back to become a positive force in their community. But others took more traditional routes to leadership. They formed tenants associations or block associations, all different kinds of groups that work together in this process.
Okay.
Well, you mentioned this, but again, now, all of these principles, they go very good with democracy, but I cannot imagine them going well with the capitalist system in the United States.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds for me more social, but where in the United States?
No, I agree. It's, I think, in fact, an ecological society and corporate capitalism are incompatible, because capitalism is an economic system that's based on growth. And we see that the planet has certain biological limits that can't be exceeded. So they're grabbing all of the resources and fouling the planet, and it's all in the name of profit and growth. And ultimately, there's an ecological imperative that's going to come up against, that is coming up against capitalism. We see it in the climate crisis today. So no, I don't think capitalism is the economic system for an ecological society.
I wanted to ask you,
Yes.
I don't know if I have time to explain now, but I'm a student and I've encountered the concept of resilience recently. And I understand, like sustainability, it has become a little bit of a controversial concept because, there are people like Reid and others, authors who see it as as conserving the neoliberal ways
Yes,
of
sure.
we want to be like heat us more, we can adapt.
Yeah.
But then also it's been so much embraced by grassroots communities. So I was wondering, where do you stand, or how do you understand it?
It's not a concept that I've worked with a lot. Of course, I've encountered it. And I think that, in fact, they're really talking about two different things. Capitalism is very resilient. It's the most adaptable economic system the world has ever seen. They've been able to adapt to all kinds of demands and conditions and still maintain its basic structure and its basic dynamic. So I'm not worried about capitalism's resiliency. In fact, I would like to find a way to undercut that very quickly, but it will probably take a little more time. On the level of community, yes, communities are resilient, which, in my understanding, means they are able also to adapt. The question is, why should they have to adapt? Why should, in fact, things get so bad that New York City has to talk about building a sea gate to shut off the ocean to prevent the flooding of downtown Manhattan? Why should things get, and also the most resilient societies, of course, are going to be the wealthiest ones. And this is where the issue of climate justice becomes terribly important, because something on the order of 80 million people live in low-lying coastal areas in the poorest countries in the world, and they're not so resilient. They're not going to be able to spend the billions of dollars to build a seawall to protect their investments. In fact, we're already seeing low-lying areas. We're seeing South Sea Islands. My wife and I visited Barrow, Alaska, which is the northernmost settlement in North America, several years ago, they'd already lost their barrier islands, their beaches were eroding. The Inupiaq Eskimo people who've been living there and hunting whales for 6,000 years are about to see their entire culture and history wiped out. So, the question of resilience is who is going to be resilient. And unfortunately, I think resilience is going to occur we'll see wealthier communities adapting and we'll see poorer communities suffering, as is usually the case with any crisis. So I think it's interesting. It's something I would like to study more, actually, and see how people are defining the concept and utilizing it. Yes.
I have an observation that you mentioned something about that we should try to kind of look at nature and then just to learn from it, basically.
Yes.
And so when you gave the example of lion and ant, I kind of instantaneously thought about the lion being the people with power.
Yeah.
Let's say the people who take the big predators, and we are the ants.
Yeah.
So in a way, that's so the next steps that in my thought was that why should the ant convince the lion to live in the same way? If the nature is so diverse and so different, it would be almost impossible to convince anybody or everybody to live in the same way. Some people or some lions might not even understand what ants are talking. So in this way, it's very difficult to. Yeah, so it's very difficult to form kind of a community where everybody understands each other.
I would agree. And I think that using your analogy, the lions of Wall Street have a very different set of interests from the rest of us lowly ants, who they're sucking blood from and taking profit from. So yeah, there are some contradictions and there are some conflicts, but ultimately the ants outnumber the lions by a huge percentage. Occupy Wall Street, we talked about the 1% versus the 99%. Are we going to continue to let the 1% dictate the terms under which we live? Or can we empower ourselves as ants, empower our communities, and bring about the kinds of changes necessary? Some people we will convince. Some of the 1% will be enlightened, will understand, will want to join with us in this reconstructive project. Others will oppose it with every ounce of power they have, and we need to be prepared for that. We need to be prepared to confront power. I'm a nonviolent person, and I believe in nonviolent revolution, and I've seen historical examples of how very powerful empires have been brought to their knees by people's movements without resorting to violence. And it's that kind of model that I would suggest. Actually, the model that I really like is the model of the Enlightenment. The original Enlightenment in the 17th, 18th century, where a small group of people, radical thinkers, had these crazy ideas that kings didn't rule by divine right, that the church was not actually reflecting a great truth, that people had the ability to govern themselves. These were the original liberal ideas that gave birth to the liberal revolutions, the French Revolution, the American Revolution. But those ideas were first held by just a tiny group of people. And then they began to educate others about the ideas, and they percolated throughout the society. It took about 100 years. But of course, they didn't have Facebook or television or any of the technology we had. In fact, they were largely illiterate. So there were a few books and pamphlets, and they were passed hand to hand, and they were talked about over dinner tables and in taverns. And then 100 years of these ideas percolating ultimately resulted in the revolutions that changed the underlying structures of society. And I'm not saying that the Enlightenment achieved an enlightened society, but I am saying that it represents the same kind of process that I see us in the midst of today. And in fact, the ideas are no longer held by only a tiny group of radical thinkers. There are people all over the world who share these ideas. And there are huge social movements that are concerned with these ideas and are concerned with the future of the planet. And we have the internet and printing presses, high-speed presses and television and kinds of forms in which these ideas can be communicated much more effectively than they did in the Enlightenment. So I think we're already in the midst of that kind of change. And I can't say when or how, but ultimately I believe, I hope, fervently hope, that they will result in a similar level of change in the underlying structures of our society. So I don't know if that answers your question. But
you think you got an answer to your, like, because I had a feeling you hinted of. Did you also have a question about that there is a problem drawing principles from nature to apply to society? Like,
not exactly.
No,
but
not
it
really.
was just kind of like an analogy.
Yes. Okay.
I liked your analogy.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Wave your hands.
Today I have been at a meeting for the regional inspectors for environment and health. I work as a health inspector, and I was thinking about what you said about your efforts to live green, but the big plant beside you is letting out, tremendously amounts of whatever.
Yeah.
And I can assure you that being a green inspector, so to speak, it's not easy, because all the obstacles in the way to make factories produce things greener, there are huge obstacles in the way.
Sure.
I know even the courts are pressing us down because that little factory, should he or she pay 25 million crowns? Oh no, that's not possible. Let's make it 500,000 and things like that. So it's not easy to by the law make things better, because the law is
I sympathize.
Unbalanced.
Yes, very unbalanced, and it must be a very frustrating position to be in. I don't have an easy answer. I think we can change laws, but what I also think it's not just a question of changing laws. One of the things that social ecology tries to do is always take the analysis a little deeper. So we look at that factory and it's polluting. So an environmentalist might say, well, we can put a scrubber on the smokestack to clean up the particulate matter, and that takes care of the problem. But a social ecologist would look at that and say, well, the particulates and the pollution are a problem, but the cause isn't really the smokestack. The cause is a centralized system of industrial production that builds huge factories and centralizes energy production, let's say. And then we would take the analysis even further and say, and underlying that problem is the nature of capitalism itself. So the solution is not really, certainly we would be all for putting a scrubber on the smokestack. No one's going to oppose that. But if we really want to solve the problem, we have to go deeper. And we have to really eradicate the real source, which is social in nature. Once again, we come around to that idea that all environmental problems are essentially social problems.